Welcome in. Ready to trade those leprechaun myths for some hard history?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Today's deep dive takes us to 20th century Ireland. And get this, it's a century packed with more drama than a St. Patrick's Day parade gone wrong. Rebellions, civil wars, even some unexpected team-ups on the world stage.
Absolutely. It's a story that really challenges the simplistic view many have of 20th century Ireland.
Right, so buckle up because we're diving headfirst into a century that saw Ireland fight for its identity, grapple with internal conflicts, and ultimately rise from the ashes.
It's a story that starts in 1900. Now, picture this. Ireland under British rule, part of the United Kingdom. But as those first-hand accounts and historical texts you shared reveal, the desire for self-governance. Oh, that fire was already burning bright.
Yeah, you can practically hear the echoes of those debates, like John Redmond fighting for home rule, trying to give Ireland more control while still under British rule. Can you imagine the tension in Parliament?
It was a powder keg, really. And meanwhile, you had groups like the Irish Volunteers preparing for the possibility of armed resistance, a direct response to the Ulster Volunteers up north. Talk about a divided island.
Talk about a recipe for conflict, and that's where the Easter Rising comes in, 1916. This wasn't just some peaceful protest. This was a full-on rebellion right in the heart of Dublin.
Right. And it's in the Easter Rising where we see figures like James Connolly becoming almost mythical.
He was one of the leaders, right?
Yes, and after being captured and sentenced to death, he was too injured to stand for his execution. So what did they do? Tied him to a chair and shot him. Talk about defiance.
Wow. His death, along with the executions of other leaders, really seemed to turn the tide of public opinion.
Absolutely. It fueled this wave of anger towards British rule. Sinn Féin, the political party, rose from the ashes, with figures like Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera stepping into the light.
And that leads us to the War of Independence from 1919 to 1921.
Right, a brutal conflict. And you know, it's important to remember this wasn't just Ireland versus Britain. This war exposed deep, deep rifts within Irish society itself.
Oh, absolutely. Some of those stories, those accounts you shared, really paint a picture of how brutal it got. Families torn apart, neighbors turning on each other.
And the violence. It left scars, thousands dead, and the mass exodus of Protestants from the newly formed Irish Free State. Just one example of the war's lasting impact.
So after years of fighting, Ireland was on the brink of independence, right?
You'd think so, right. But it wasn't that simple. 1921, the Irish Free State is born, a huge step towards self-governance. But the treaty that made it happen, the Anglo-Irish Treaty, oh, that's where things get messy.
You got that right.
Yeah.
From the analysis you gave me, this treaty was a real mixed bag.
It really was. It gave Ireland more freedom than ever before. Its own parliament, army, control over finances.
Sounds pretty good so far. What's the catch?
Here's the kicker. The Free State, even with all that, was still part of the British Commonwealth, meaning they had to swear allegiance to the British monarch.
Whoa. Talk about a tough pill to swallow after fighting for complete independence.
Exactly. Imagine risking it all for freedom, only to be asked to bow to the crown you just tried to break free from. It caused a rift, a huge one, right down the middle of Irish society.
Yeah, I can see that. Especially for those who fought tooth and nail in the war.
It felt like a betrayal to some. And that, my friend, is the spark that ignited the Irish Civil War. Even more brutal, even more heartbreaking than the fight against the British.
Brother against brother, right? I saw some really powerful diary entries you dug up. People caught in the middle, families ripped apart.
It was a dark time. And, you know, the effects of that war still felt today. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the two big parties in Ireland, their roots go right back to that Civil War divide.
Wow. So even today, that history is present.
And it's not just the parties. The war claims some of the biggest names. Michael Collins, Arthur Griffith, architects of the treaty itself. Talk about adding salt to the wound.
It's like the fight for their future cost them their present.
In a way, yes. And with Ireland so divided, so wounded, rebuilding wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about rebuilding trust, rebuilding a nation.
Imagine the weight on their shoulders. A new government, new systems, a wounded population, and on top of that, trying to find their place in the world. No easy task.
You can say that again. Did you know that in those early years, the Irish civil service, the heart of the government, relied heavily on British civil servants?
Really? Wow. Even after independence, that connection remained. History's a funny thing, isn't it?
That's one word for it. And amidst all this, Fianna Fáil, born from that anti-treaty sentiment, they rise to power in 32.
With De Valera at the helm.
The one and only. And their vision for Ireland: economic nationalism, self-sufficiency, protecting their own. And they weren't afraid to throw some elbows on the world stage to prove it.
You talk about the Anglo-Irish trade war. That was a gutsy move, taking on Britain like that, especially for a young nation.
They meant business. Refused to pay those land annuities they owed to Britain. Sent a clear message: we're independent and we'll fight for it.
Even if it meant some economic hardship. I read those analyses you shared, really showed how tough it was on Irish farmers.
Tough, but it showed their mettle. They had to adapt, find new markets, get creative. Lasted from 32 to 38, this whole thing.
6 years. Eventually, they reached a compromise. But wow, talk about making a statement.
Oh, they made it loud and clear. This wasn't just about trade. It was about Ireland asserting itself, finding its place on the global stage. And it set the tone for how they'd navigate the even bigger storm brewing on the horizon.
And then boom, World War II explodes, right? And Ireland, they're walking a tightrope. Neutrality.
A very delicate dance, yeah. Fresh out of their own fight, you can't blame them for wanting to sit this one out. Plus, they're military. Not exactly ready for a global brawl.
But they weren't exactly wallflowers either, right?
Yeah.
From what I gathered, they were doing some serious behind-the-scenes work.
Oh, absolutely. Sharing intel with the Allies, for one. And get this, they had this whole contingency plan just in case the Germans came knocking.
Whoa, seriously? A defense strategy, even though they were neutral?
They weren't taking any chances. They had fought hard for their independence. They weren't about to surrender it without a fight.
Makes sense. But it sounds like not everyone was thrilled with Ireland staying neutral.
Yeah, there were factions, some in the IRA even, who saw it as turning their backs on the fight against fascism. Things got, well, complicated. Some of them, they actually looked to the Nazis for support. Figured an alliance with Germany could be their ticket to a fully unified, independent Ireland.
Talk about a desperate move.
Desperate times, desperate measures, right. And it really highlights how messy the whole thing was, the whole world grappling with this massive conflict. And even within Ireland, you had these divisions.
Yeah. And then there's De Valera, offering condolences when Hitler dies. Talk about a controversial move.
Oh, yeah, that raised some eyebrows, to say the least. He claimed it was just protocol, but still. Makes you think.
It does. And speaking of complicated legacies, let's talk about Ireland after the war. Their economy, it seemed like those old policies, the self-sufficiency thing, weren't cutting it anymore.
The world was changing, and Ireland, they needed to change with it. Enter Sean Lemass, becomes Taoiseach in 59, and he's got a whole new vision, which was out with the old, in with the new. He knew Ireland couldn't just shut itself off from the world anymore, so he flips the script. Foreign investment, free trade. That's the ticket.
Wow, what a shift. After all that fighting against outside influence, to suddenly embrace it.
It was a gamble, for sure. But Lemass, he was playing the long game. He pumped money into education, infrastructure, making Ireland attractive to foreign companies. And guess what?
It worked.
Like a charm. Laid the groundwork for the Celtic Tiger boom years later, from struggling with poverty and emigration after the war to becoming an economic powerhouse. Amazing transformation.
It really is. It's like throughout everything we've talked about, one word keeps coming to mind. Resilient.
Absolutely. Every time it seemed like Ireland was down for the count, they found a way to get back up, dust themselves off, and come back stronger.
So there you have it. 20th century Ireland. From fighting for their freedom to navigating a world at war, from embracing economic nationalism to becoming a global player. What a century. It really makes you think about the legacy of this history, how it shaped Ireland's identity, its relationship with its past, and its place in the world. A lot to unpack, right? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into 20th century Ireland. We'll see you in the next episode.